Hello, everyone. Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Ministry of Propaganda. And this week we are going to be talking about strikes. Strikes in the UK. There are apparently lots of strikes going on, and they have been for quite a while, but they are actually increasing. So nurses are on strike, ambulance workers are on strike, bus drivers are on strike, barristers are on strike, border forces on strike, railway workers are on strike, teachers are on strike, the Royal Mail is on strike, junior doctors are on strike, civil servants are on strike, lecturers are on strike, and firefighters are on strike. And I might even be missing out on some of those. So yeah, we're going to be talking about strikes and why they're striking, and also looking at some great clips of someone called Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, the Railway Workers Union, and just enjoying some of Mick Lynch's finest work. So Chris, where should we begin? Where do you want to start?
So this has been an absolutely unprecedented year. The level of strikes that we have seen have probably been the highest that we've seen definitely in our lifetime. We're getting to that point now where people are starting to say the magic words, although they've been quite obviously missing from the dialogue until quite recently. And those words, of course, being general strike. So obviously we're going to get into this quite slowly. So obviously we saw a lot of this start beginning of last year, May, June last year. And obviously, with everything, particularly these strikes we've seen all over Europe, we've seen them everywhere. But in the UK, we've had some different reasons for blame, which are unique to the UK. Obviously, we've had the situation in Ukraine, which is getting blamed on everything. I can't even buy a £7 block of cheese anymore without being told that this is because of Putin's war in Ukraine, like our cheese comes from Kiev, which it does not. But obviously Brexit as well, which has had whether it has had an effect to cause the strikes or is the perfect excuse that, as Boris Johnson would call, an oven-ready excuse, ready to go. So where what do you want to...
Yeah, no, I'm glad you give some context. I've also read the same things, that trying to understand it, Brexit, the war, COVID, of course. So I agree with some of that. I think that some of it also a bit self-inflicted. Perhaps if we'd gotten a better Brexit and or a better organized Brexit, a more oven-ready one, perhaps, yeah. But yeah, I try to give people a sense of the kind of sort of man that Mick Lynch is. So let's just show you something of him at a rally a few days ago. And he's addressing a whole big bunch of workers. And just to give you an idea of, the kind of way he speaks when he's up on the stage doing the big union man talk. So here you go.
This we demand, and we are united. We will not be divided on the basis of who we work for. We will not be divided on the basis of our belief or the colour of our skin or the part of the country we're from. We are the working class. We are back. We are here. We are demanding change. We refuse to be poor, and we are going to win for our people on our terms.
There you go. So there he is, the big man, Mick Lynch. So that's a rally, I think, for a bunch of other unions, not just the RMT. He's quite an interesting character, though. He has, I think the thing I like about him is that he is able to represent his particular sort of workers, the RMT, the railway workers, the tube workers. But as you can see there, he does understand that this is a class question. I mean, I think obviously lots of people in the media would love if he said he was a Marxist or said he was a communist or said he was something like that. He's too clever. He knows that, what will happen if you agree or say, well, maybe I am, or something like this. And we'll play some clips later where they try and catch him out and they really fail on falling their asses. But yeah, Chris, what do you think about that?
Yeah, obviously he's incredibly charismatic figure, sort of larger than life. He's been sort of appointed the sort of unofficial leader of the entire series of strikes that have been going on since last year. Obviously, you said that he's leader of the RMT, which is by far one of the more militant unions there are. They do fight, and they're one of the few organizations that seem to have always had a fighting fund, which so many unions that you go to union meetings, and the notion of going on strike was never part of the question because they don't even have a fund to cover in that occasion. if you don't prepare to strike, then you prepare to fail, really, don't you? The whole
Yeah.
idea of a union, as it was meant to have been, was always the organised use of workers using their labour for negotiating. And if you're not able to withdraw the one thing that we do have, which is our labour, then what are you doing? So it does seem to be the best of, unfortunately, what tends to be modern day labour movement, a bad bunch.
I think I agree with you entirely that out of nowhere, maybe in the last year, he has come out of, and become the sort of more militant voice of what's left of the union movement in the UK. And if you sort of close your eyes and think back to sort of the last 30 years or 35 years, the last time we had someone talking like this was Arthur Scargill.
We had Bob Crow. Bob Crow was good, who I believe was...
Yes, true.
I think Bob Crow was also the RMT.
He was RMT, I believe.
I'm not sure, but but Arthur Scargill, definitely, who was a Marxist to some degree and flavour.
Yeah, so this is kind of nice to see that in the sort of drudgery of the last 35 years of unions slowly losing and slowly sort of kind of fading, actually, not entirely, but certainly comparatively to historically, sort of compared to what they were before, you would kind of think that, oh wow, okay, cool. At least they have had these characters, being prepared and going through their strikes, going through their preparations and dealing with employers, learning how to speak, learning how to coordinate and organize workers. And this is one of those products of the movement. So again, I don't want to worship an individual
That's it.
as much as I sound like it. But he's, a product of lots of training and lots of experience of a broader thing. There's also, I'm sure there's also other just as equally good.
I just sort of jump on your terminology there. He is exactly a product of. It is to make a point of splitting the hair between this isn't a solution. This is a symptom of the problems that society is facing, i.e. capitalism. But this is not going to be the solution, which is really important in driving people's expectations home when they're talking about the labour movement and the trade union movement. Because obviously, if you sort of pin your hopes on this, it's sort of cynicalism, isn't it? The idea of the revolution will emerge from the trade union movement, and that all you need to do is go on strike enough, and the means of production will just be inherited to the workers, which has never been true and has never succeeded.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've talked about workerism before in the past, that you can have this thing called workerism and the sort of trade union sort of obsession, where you think that's it, that's where the struggle will be. Just so people get an idea. So why are people striking? What kinds of experiences, what's going on with pay, with living conditions and whatnot? So I'm just going to play something from The Guardian showing some other workers on strike, and just the kind of things that they're dealing with every day, and sort of giving their rationale as to why they're on strike. What's the reason? What are they doing? Why are they doing this? Here we go.
The largest nursing strike in NHS history is underway. Clapham doesn't pay our bills. Claps aren't good enough for us anymore.
Postal workers, border force staff, driving test examiners, national highways traffic officers, RMT members of Network Rail, and teachers in England and Wales are set to go on strike.
My role in society is more than just teaching children. It's about helping communities, and I've stopped being able to do that.
The government took aim at striking ambulance teams today, saying new laws were needed to protect lives.
Our last option we've got is to strike. If they take that away from us, what have we got?
I think the government needs to recognise that they're not going to break the strikes, no matter what tactics they put in.
It is a month full of disruption.
This is the
Okay, so that's just to give you some context there, Chris, of why people are on strike and who's on strike. As I mentioned there, about hours, of course, but particularly pay. The clapping, as we all remember, in COVID, that we clap for the nurses. Let's clap for the nurses, the essential workers. That doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah. And I think I made the point at the time when Parliament started the clapping thing with Bojo in Parliament, clapping for the nurses. The last time they clapped for nurses before that was when they all applauded each other for shooting down the nurses' pay rise. It was exactly that. Applause don't pay the bills. Going out into the streets clapping at 7 o'clock. As soon as this was over, well, we're not officially out of the pandemic. We are still, as far as the who concerned, we are still in it. We've just all forgotten about it. But that goodwill towards the NHS has certainly gone.
Yes.
And now that they're demanding a fair shake, the media have lost patience with them. And it is only the media, as we're going to learn. Despite their best attempts, these strikes are overwhelmingly popular and have vast public support.
Yes, actually, I will get up the article you shared, which shows that. I should be able to show one more person. I don't know if they have these in other parts of the world. I'm not particularly sure, but there's something called a food bank in the UK, quite common. It's not just one; they're all over the country. There's probably thousands of them. I should show you something that is you wouldn't expect to be happening in the people that are working and have to go to food banks.
It's coming in. A lot more professionals coming in just because they just can't afford to, to make that decision. In food, I'm frightened. I'm quite worried for people, really. So this is the community shop and takeaway. They come in, they get a basket of food, and they take a donation to the till. Any adult who is hungry eats for free in our community takeaway. It's hashtag feed bellies, not bins. It's about saving food, saving food. The stigma of using this, it isn't a thing in children anymore. Everyone knows that you can come in here and you can get something relatively cheap. The only thing is you would never have seen it. 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been here, it wouldn't have had the need to exist. And I can't donate to the food bank anymore, which is sad. My role in society is more than just teaching children. It's about helping communities and the community that I live in. And I've stopped being able to do that. And that's quite heartbreaking, really.
So yeah, there you go. That's the kind of things that working people that have jobs, bear in mind, these are not homeless people. These people have jobs, full-time jobs, and they have to go and basically get food that has been donated by most likely other workers. That's the kind of state for a lot of people. And
it's shocking to think of this as where we are as a developed economy. This shouldn't, from what we've been told about how capitalism is meant to work in the West by the capitalists, this should not be the case in a developed 21st century Western nation. You'd expect to see these levels of poverty elsewhere in the world, but definitely not in Western Europe or in the West at large.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's also why indeed the strikes and the workers going on strike do have immense public support. So rising public support for unions despite widespread strikes, new Sky News poll suggests. So this is from the 31st of January, and Chris shared this. It shows that actually people are supporting them, but it doesn't, it's not surprising that other people that are not in the unions support the strikes if that's the kind of life that a lot of people are living, going to food banks. Of course they support the strikes. They understand it. They understand that workers want more pay. And
it's also despite the media's best effort. Now, every single clip that you can watch of the journalists going into the streets, particularly of Sky News and the BBC, trying to speak to people, they say it in such a negative way. How are these strikes affecting you negatively? And they're almost trying to put the words into the person's mouth that these strikes are bad and they should stop so I can get to work. And when they no, actually, I support the strikes. They don't know what to do with that information because it's not the narrative that the media want, and it's failing. They're so used to being able to write the news themselves. And because it's not working this time, it's frustrating them tremendously, and it's amazing to see. I love watching it.
You're absolutely. I mean, for Sky News to be sharing this, of all the news out there, this does not go well with editorial board. This is not the kind of stuff that they would like to be publishing and sharing. They obviously do have to report the news, but it's always their version of the news in a particular frame. And when the facts are the facts, and you do have strong support for various types of workers on strike, then they have to report at some point, even begrudgingly. So this is definitely not something that they want to talk about. And as we'll show you in a bit, they also, if they're forced to talk about it, they like to try and frame it in a particular way, and they like to choose the argument. Let's say that. Speaking of also, yes, the cost of living crisis and some of the absurdities of it. So just something a bit more lighthearted. One of the morning shows in the UK called This Morning, a few weeks ago had a prize, sort of a spinning wheel that you could win some prizes. So maybe some money, maybe a holiday or something. But this time they decided they were going to, have an innovation and provide something new. So where's it gone? Here we go. Take a look.
So we'll pay your energy bills. We've got £1,000 as well. So this is energy bills, I think, for 4 months if it stops on that. So how are your energy bills? Are you a bit worried about it all?
Major.
Yeah.
I've got one of these prepayment meters and it's absolutely murder.
Oh God. Right. Well, let's hope it lands on one of those then.
Whatever, you're going to win some money. So
Here we
don't
go.
worry. Here we go.
One way or t'other. Here we go. Round and round it goes. Where it stops, nobody knows. £1,000 on energy bill. £1,000 on energy bill. It is going to be. Energy bill.
There we go.
Oh, well, edge then.
I mean,
sorry you lost.
We can really
Let's turn the radiators off.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to go £40, so you're only going to heat the house for half of them, 2 weeks a month.
Yeah.
Or half temperature.
This is the Hunger Games at this point, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. That is, we're talking about a necessity. Heating in the winter in the UK is not something that you should really, be sort of giving out as you've just won something that you need.
Yes. Shelter.
Yeah. Shelter and a house. Yay. Yeah. So that's again just to give the context of why are people striking? Why are people supporting the strikes? Well, we have an energy crisis and a cost of living crisis and inflation. So yeah, I think I was going to play a clip of Mick Lynch talking about inflation.
Yes.
Just give me a moment to get that up. But yeah, any other thoughts or contributions, Chris?
So obviously, inflation and interest rates have hit tethering over 10%. Now, personally, I'm not a homeowner; I rent. So interest rates is something that hasn't really directly affected me. I don't borrow money. I don't have any finance credit. I can't find anyone who would ever give me any. But obviously, you've seen these reports or videos of people being offered homes, and then the bank have pulled the deal because the Bank of England have increased rates to something that's just unachievable. So obviously, if you remember a decade or so ago where you had the housing crisis, it's easy to see that that's going to happen again. I saw an article in the Financial Times written by the type of person who reads the Financial Times, moaning, saying millennials are hoping and praying for another housing bubble crash so they can afford a house. I was like, well, of course we are, because that's the only time when we can buy something. When the economy collapses, we have to buy as much as we can. So
yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty smart to me. Yeah, millennials are waiting for prices to drop with the crash. Yes. Yeah, I'm sure someone from the Financial Times would also understand that, appreciate that. Yeah. So the next ones I've got then is Mick Lynch talking about inflation. So he's here at a select committee from a bunch of Tory MPs. So they've invited him to come and speak so that they can try and understand how things work. And it doesn't go well for them. They don't, they're not particularly. I wouldn't just say. I just think they should have maybe prepared a bit better, or maybe just shouldn't have done this at all because it's Mick Lynch.
But we're a long way on pay. I mean, the inflation rate that we use for this year is currently in excess of 14%. That's the one that the railway use. The previous offer we had is 4%. The cumulative inflation for 22 and 23 will be in excess of 20%. We've been offered on the talks 8% for those 2 years, so it's less than half. And we've been offered 9% by the Network Rail, which is less than half again. But let's not forget, we haven't had a pay rise in many of these companies for 3 and 4 years. So we are having our wages reduced, spending power at the supermarket and with the energy companies and everything else, year on year on year. And every week that passes, it gets worse.
So yeah, there you go. I mean, that's what that means. If you don't get a pay rise that matches inflation, you are getting a pay cut. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
You know, those are numbers. That's how it works. And it's an excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of real pay, your spending power is less. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of usually Tory economists saying we need to warn against chasing inflation with pay rises. That's their approach. But as far as working people taking home pay, well, that's just not good enough. When we've been watching these politicians, ever since Bojo, I've pointed this out before, Boris Johnson started this craze in Parliament, not just in his party, everyone wearing a Ukrainian pin. And every time the economy is questioned, one of the main things that they can go to is war in Ukraine. And this pin, in part, is there to remind people there constantly to try and drive this point home that what we're suffering here is for some apparent greater good in Eastern Europe. And obviously they're hoping that this is going to turn into votes in the next election, which I would put money on not working. I think that goodwill in terms of when people can't afford to heat their homes and can't afford to put food in their bellies is not going to, as Mick Lynch would say, butter any parsnips. People care about what's going on here right now, that these are the realities, and to try and link this, whether it's accurate or not, with a war that's going on the other side of Europe is just ridiculous. Now, I said earlier on that we've seen protests throughout Europe. Some of the biggest protests in Europe over the past few months have been going on in France and Czech Republic. 20 years out of date with my Czechoslovakia there. And those protests, in large, their demands have been for neutrality, for the same reason of rising costs like ours, but their demand of neutrality, because they have put this together that we're not paying for a war that we don't support and don't understand. If this is what it means, that we have to pay up to 4 times as much for energy than we did last year, then count me out.
Yeah, no, excellent points. I mean, I do think that we've discussed this before, the leadership crisis within the UK, within the Conservative Party particularly, but they are losing control of the economy. They have, as you've just seen, some of the biggest strikes in 10 years, more than 10 years, potential to go into a general strike. I mean, maybe we'll discuss that in a bit, but that's happening. You have the inflation, then you have the energy crisis, which is linked to the war, which they've kept going. And of course, we've already mentioned Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson and the whole sort of leadership collapse. But I do think that the Ukraine conflict, partly, as you've alluded to there, is just trying to be some sort of direction that they have some control over, that they say, well, okay, let's go and fight Putin. That way we can sort of try and etch out this global Britain that we're apparently trying to build after Brexit. All we have left is some sort of NATO position and some sort of military position. So we'll try and just focus on that and build on that. But yeah, even that you could say is a poor decision. I mean, where is it all leading to? What, the collapse of Russia, nuclear war? I mean, where are we going with that? What's the end game? So it's just a further symptom of the leadership crisis, I think. And in addition to that, I think that if we're talking about the 1980s, about strikes and stuff, the only sort of reference you can go to then is just, let's try to think that the Conservatives will try and make this into their sort of Falklands War, which can propel them to two victories in elections or whatever. I don't think it's going to happen. Maybe for a few months, maybe for a few months, I might get some support and some sympathy for refugees, of course. But like you said, buttering parsnips. If people go to food banks, and also if people are supporting the striking workers, I think economics is going to win in the end, and people's bellies and people's pockets will win in the end. The next ad I want to play is also the same committee. The thing you can see here is just that Lynch is not just someone who's extremely sharp and funny who can take apart a journalist, like we'll see a bit later, and he's not someone who can also, talk the big talk at the rally and get the troops going. He's also someone who knows the details of the matters at hand. He knows the stats. He's very smart. So I'll just play this quick one here.
That the amount of government funding to the railways has actually doubled since 2015-16 to 2019-20. So where do you get your figures from?
I get it from the employers. They told me they've been asked to reduce their costs by 2 billion. I get it from the London Mayor when I go and meet him and the Commissioner for London Transport. Says that I've been told to reduce my budget by 2 billion. That's what the savings are for. You've increased the funding. It doesn't go to our people. It goes to these private sector operators and to Network Rail. We don't get all the money. The pay bill in the railway industry is quite modest. The staffing is at a low level.
That the government are putting more money into
the government
the
is putting money into it. They'll probably all have to put money into it. I would ask why they put money into the railway and allow rolling stock companies and train operating companies and Network Rail subcontractors to extract billions of pounds of profits since the 90s straight into people's pockets in through dividends. So you'll do the same with health and all the rest of it eventually when you get the opportunity. So you'll fund them, but you'll shovel it into the private sector. That's what you've been doing. They take profits. They made profit every day during the pandemic, and they've made profit on every day of these strikes. They get protected against the loss of revenue, and they've not been affected bottom line. Two of the companies are subject to speculators' takeovers, and one of them has been taken over during this dispute. There's loads of money in the railway. It's being made by private sector operators.
So there you go. I mean, I feel like this guy, the person that asked that question, was just hoping that saying, oh, you recognize the government puts money into the railways, right? I don't know where he thought that was going to go. Mick Lynch clearly fucking knows all of the details and how the funding works. So he just made himself look completely stupid there.
Yeah, and this is the whole thing of privatization and privatization by stealth. The same argument that we've seen being used with the NHS. Government, we put all this money into the NHS. It's like, yeah, but you've sold it. So the money just goes straight through the NHS into private hands instead of going to where it needs to do. Since early 90s, which everyone always talks about how the Conservative Party have killed the NHS or killing it, privatising it. It was Labour who started with the PFIs in the early 90s, whose privatisation by stealth. At first, it was just basically the top of the hospital that was privatisation. It was 90% public, 10% private. Modern day, that's flipped. And it's happened so slowly that people don't notice. It's almost to the point, as long as the reception is still in public hands, you can say that the hospital is nationalised. And it's just not realistic at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So later on in this video, I'm not going to play all of the clips, but there's another piece where he talks about how this strike actually from the perspective of the DFT, the Department for Transport, they knew that there was going to be a dispute arising at some point. So at some Sunday evening a few months ago, before we went into Christmas and whatnot, they dropped some bombshell on terms of conditions and pay rates and whatnot for the railway industry. And they knew that, of course, then the RMT would have to respond, and they knew that then there would be these strikes for Christmas. Their calculation was that, okay, this is how we can then, once 6 months down the line, a year from down the line, we can sort of wear down the public's willingness to accept these strikes, because it starts with Christmas and people are buying their gifts and people are trying to see their families, to have strikes over that period. So he does talk about how all of this is very tactical or strategic from the government's perspective. And as you already mentioned as well, that it doesn't just apply to rail. They're going to be doing this and have been doing this with the NHS and with any other public service, that they slowly erode them and misfund them and operate them in a way that they can then say, oh, well, if we privatize this, it would be more efficient or better. Meanwhile, they are just running them poorly and underfunding them to the point of collapse. People waiting in queues and people not getting the services that the state has paid for. I want to play a nice one where he actually makes fun of, or he has a good burn on one of the guys here on the committee. So here we go.
We're seeing a lot fewer rush hour use, more social use, more weekend use of the railways post-COVID. Add in uncertainty on the part of consumers as to whether the train will even be running because of industrial action. How much damage has been done to the railway, particularly from consumer choice, which then plays to Mr. Ward's point about losses to the operating companies as a result, not just from industrial action, but from changed habits. How much damage has actually been done to the railway?
Loads of damage has been done, but as I say, the damage is conceived and controlled in the Department of Transport. This is their project. They knew that there would be an industrial response from the trade unions. They decided to make what they would think as a great leap forward and provoke the workforce and attack the workforce. So the damage has been envisaged in Whitehall by people who know very little about the railway. Rather than trying to get consent and evolution of the railway, they went for this great leap forward, and it's blown up in their faces. So the damage is being conceived by this administration, and they are inflicting the damage. They have also brought forward a set of legislation that they quickly abandoned on the future structure of the railway. Maybe they'll come back to that, I don't know. Maybe there'll be a new transport minister that'll have another idea. So the damage is being caused by the inconsistent and reckless policy of the people that are in control of the railway, which is the company.
And he talks about polling, which is the good one here. So here we go.
They did a poll shortly after that.
Why?
There was 75% support for the RMT. So it depends which poll you read of who's winning this. What was expected in the DFT is that would have zero support on the TAC mode. They did a poll shortly after that and said there was 75% support for the RMT. So it depends which poll you read of who's winning this. What was expected in the DFT is that would have zero support and we'd be back to work with no strikes by the end of June. Once your friends in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and all these other journals followed me from my house to the station, invaded my children's Facebook pages and all the rest of it, that we would be public enemies number one. We're not. I'm a more popular person than many of the politicians in this room, unfortunately.
We got a bit of a burn. But yeah, we'll come back. We'll get some more of these later. But yeah, as you can see, the guy knows and has been arguing, of course, the case of his workers and his industry for months. So it's a bit silly that you think that these select committee MPs who have probably had tried to sort of do a crash course on this over the course of maybe a few weeks, at best a few months, whereas he's been in that industry for decades. I just feel sorry for them, actually, because they are wholly unprepared to try and engage and try and challenge this guy on his industry publicly.
He clearly knows his stuff. And it's sincere. These people there are basically, have you ever heard of the Pinkerton's agency of like sort of strike blockers back in the day? I think the bad guys like Red Dead Redemption. This is basically what these are. These are just paid agents whose job it is to stand and be obstacles for industrial action. They're strike busters, effectively, and they have as much prep time as anything else. Like they probably spend as much time prepping for one of theirs. Probably spend less time than we do to prep one of our videos.
Yes, exactly. I mean, said it very well. The other stuff is also he drops so many or makes so many comments that usually you'd never hear in the media. So sort of just saying your friends in the Daily Mail and your friends in the Telegraph would have done this, this, and this, and the government has been trying to craft this for years. Blah, blah, blah. So there's almost a bit of they can't address everything that he's saying. He's just dropping so many attacks and so many truths as well that to counter everything, it's actually not possible. That there's not enough bandwidth. There's not enough people have enough time to listen to all your explanations. And he's just letting these things be said that usually are not said at all. The relationship between the Conservative Party, the government, the media, and big industry. And yes, how earlier he talks about how they're giving their mates these contracts to privatize and get the funds from the state to run the railway companies and whatnot. Just really, really, really good stuff. Very
because it's completely honest, and that's what's so important to sort of drive home that they are mates. When the Tories, I can't remember what Prime Minister it was at the time, when the Royal Mail was sold off. The guy who bought it went to school with them. They knew each other beforehand. These are mates. It is literally doing your mate a favour.
Yeah.
Sell us that public asset cheap, mate.
Yeah.
Let us make some money off it, because they know that public money goes in. And I'll sort you out when you're not in office anymore. That's it.
That's definitely it. I've got one more reflective piece from Lynch at this committee. So we should play this one quickly. It talks about the hypocrisy of the government, but also the rules that they're talking about in terms of what they would like to do if these strikes, if the striking workers don't get what they want. So I'll let Mick explain it better than I can.
On day one, they will put non-qualified people into signal boxes to break strikes, and they'll have safety incidents, which they have every time they have a strike, when managers break the rules and break their competency basis. But it's the unions that are endangering safety. It's the attempt to break strikes that imports more danger than anything else. And it's an infringement of civil liberties. The right to strike is something that any democratic society will have. If they want to run the signalling system on Network Rail during a dispute in the way that they will, they'll have to get all the signallers to work, and they will command them and conscript them to work. If they were doing that in Putin's Russia or in Iran or China, they would rightly be condemned. Conscripting workers to go to work against their will is an outrage, and that's what this legislation will bring forward, that either we will name them, or the companies will name them, or even the Secretary of State may name individuals that have to go to work on strike days. How that is democratic and free in a free society, I don't understand. And we'll have to challenge it in every way that we can. And it'll have to be repealed as soon as there's a change in government.
So yeah, very interesting point. I don't know if you know much about this proposed legislation, but I have heard other people say that this is what could come of all of these protests and strikes, is that the government will try and say, well, we tried to negotiate, we tried this, we have to, people are dying, people can't get to work, we have to mandate a section of emergency workers that must be in the new legislation to break strikes. And effectively then also, I mean, earlier he talked about how while COVID was on, the bosses of the privately owned sort of fleet managers, whatever, of the railway companies got given guaranteed money. But, people going on strike, their rights and their sort of entitlements as being allowed to go on strike, being eroded and eroded and eroded. And then also work itself is being eroded, as we mentioned earlier, with the inflation rate and the lack of pay rise and whatnot. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any comments on that one there, Chris.
Yeah, so this anti-strike bill that's coming up, obviously it's passed the first hurdle at the Commons. It's caused massive protests against it in its own right. And it is incredibly worrying. And for me, this is where a lot of the charisma of some of these trade union leaders sort of collapses. I watched one being interviewed by the BBC the other day, where he literally said the lines that if we are forced to cooperate with it, we will, but just be one that's going to make strikes longer and more inefficient in the future. So the fact that you just said, oh, well, if the makers abide it, we'll have to. This, for me, is absolute rubbish. This is the epitome of just conceding to the Labour aristocracy, these fake leaders. Realistically, it is only through a campaign of complete mass cooperation which will make these anti-union laws unworkable. That is the only way to get these laws to be rescinded once they're seen that they can't work and that they won't be followed in any way. Every trade union needs to vote to completely ignore these laws if they do come into place, and that is the only way that they'll be rescinded.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, yes, if you don't put a price tag that they're not willing to pay on it, they will just erode it slowly. They will make you comply. Yes,
yeah,
it does
exactly.
require fighting, not just begging. Yes. So you had some things you shared some things with me earlier, Chris. You talked about the support for strikes, which we've already mentioned. I don't know if you wanted to talk about. Well, we've already talked about the scale of the strike. I don't know if you want to mention anything else on that one.
I do here. So just here. So yesterday, obviously, we had the largest ever NHS demonstration was yesterday. So obviously, with, as I sort of alluded to earlier on, everything that's been going on. Now, at the moment, we're estimating roughly about 500,000 people have been on strike at this point. Now, that is, by standards, about a third of what was at the 1926 general strike. Since last May to now, a lot of the trade union leaders have been quite mum about using the word general strike. They haven't wanted to say it. Now it's started to be a bit more liberally used, which has posed to the question to a lot of people, is that where we're headed? So what do you think about the prospects of having a general strike in this country at this point?
I think it certainly has more potential than it has in a long time. I think that we would have to see this kind of industrial action sort of carry on for a few more months before you would see some of the unions harden, or the government harden, actually, in some cases. So if the government doesn't give concessions to the nurses and to the RMT and to, let's say, one of the two of the other groups that are not on strike, and then they can generally see that, across the unions, that they need to increase the damage, basically the cost to the government, to also just general, of course, the reduction of services. I think that realization would only happen after failed negotiations for a few more months. So obviously the RMT has been going for a few months now, but the others some of them only coming into sort of strikes. I mean, the nurses have just started. I think we'd still need a few more months of negotiations and failed negotiations. Yeah. And then also perhaps even just some, if the government goes too far with trying to stop these or repressing them even, that's would have to be pushed. I don't think that we're quite there yet. For example, even on the nurses today, the nurses in Wales didn't join the strike. So there was 2 days, yesterday and today, were strikes for the nurses across all of the UK. But the Welsh ones stopped because they were given an emergency offer from NHS Wales, which dropped them out. So you could still see stuff like that, where you have all sections of even the same union dropping out because they've been offered a separate package. So I know Scotland also are more sympathetic to the railway workers, as well as places like Merseyside and whatever. But I still think we're not quite there yet. It's going that way if things continued. It's definitely the right direction, but we need to continue. The oven needs to be on for a bit longer before we get there.
So I've got that clip up here, so we can just pull this up.
Teachers, university lecturers, train drivers and civil servants united in determination today at a rally in Leeds. On picket lines dotted around the town, there was talk that this was a general strike in all but name.
As a historian of Labour history, welcome back to 1926.
I mean, do you think the public's really going to be on side for that if this keeps going much longer?
I mean, the thing is, we are the public, we are the workers, we are on strike. So the public is on side, clearly, because we're all striking for better conditions. We've realised what we're worth, and it's important that we keep doing it.
I think that's a really good line that she said. Just, we are the public, and we are on strike. Everyone that I've spoken to who's not on strike wishes they were. You get so much people saying that, I wish my industry was unionized so I could join them. Unfortunately, I personally work in telecommunications. This is an area that trade unions have tried to break into for so long, and it's been so hard to. It's almost a self-policing industry, because for the majority of people, especially call center workers, they work with a microphone in their face all day. They have staggered breaks, so the phones are always manned. They don't even have that sort of canteen time that warehouse workers would altogether. So it's so hard to sort of get that relationship, to build that conversation up with someone to suggest, should we be unionizing together? Because it's not really something you want to be sending over a work email.
Yes. But I think you're right, though, in terms of the profile of unions. So because of how many strikes there are, and it's nurses and it's the train drivers and it's everyone, almost everyone, people are now talking about unions. Like, oh yeah, my girlfriend's sister, their sort of workplace, they've also now been talking about, well, our boss has just cut our hours, and now they're going like, well, someone should do something about this. We should do something together, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think the conversation about workplace and unionization of workplace is now something that's far more in the sort of common earshot of normal people, more so than it was 5 years ago, let's say. Yeah,
exactly. And this is why it's so sort of important now, as a more than it ever has been, that the need for the sort of ideological lead to this movement. As sort of we've said before, and as Lenin pointed out, in the working class on its own, independently and spontaneously, will only ever come up with trade unions.
Yeah,
and that's sort of the peak of where it will sort of tether off and eventually lose momentum. And I've got another little article here from the communists, and the TUC, Trade Union Council, directs its members' anger into more meaningless busy work. They're directing their members into a email campaign against their local MPs and government to beg against the anti-union bill. And it's something like that. Like, really, that this is the sort of lowest form of action. This is sort of the American sort of thing. Like, if you stand up and bring your congressman.
Yes, basically.
Has that ever worked?
Yes, that's as far as I got. Yeah, phone your congressman, write to your MP. Okay, yeah, I mean that's actually a very good point. And
it's this idea that they just don't have a solution. They know they're mad. They're right to be mad. They know something needs to be done, but they don't know what. So it's just
yes. So
eventually they have to go back to work.
Well, that's it. Actually, because you talked about write your MP a letter or send an email. So who are you going to send an email to? I guess the Labour Party. So now Mick Lynch, actually, there's a nice piece I'm going to play. Some of the more sort of comedic, kind of funny stuff of him actually taking down people on an interview. So let's play that. There's actually a piece where he mentions specifically the Labour Party.
Doing full-time jobs, who are having to take state benefits and use food banks. That is a national disgrace.
What will they do if agency workers try to cross those picket lines?
Well, we will picket them. What do you think we'll do? We run a picket line and we'll ask them not to go to work. Direct line.
If you are a Marxist, then you're into revolution and into bringing down capitalism. So are you or aren't you?
Richard, you do come up with the most remarkable twaddle sometimes.
That's right. Don't tell me who I am and whether or not I'm working class or whatever, any of those sorts of things.
You weren't working class. I don't even know your name.
Onto the street. You can see what picketing involves. I can't believe this line of questioning. Picketing is standing outside the workplace to try and encourage people who want to go to work not to go to work. What else do you think it involved? You've also lied that we left negotiations on Saturday and went to a rally. There were no negotiations scheduled for Saturday. You are a liar. The pensions of our members are going to be decimated. They're going to make us poorer, not only while we're at work, but poorer in retirement. And that's an agenda that the government has got because they want to subsidise the private sector in this country, as they are doing in the health service, which is being consumed by the private sector, as they've done in the education service, which is being consumed by the private sector.
He should be apologising to the doctors and nurses who can't get to hospital, the patients who can't get their operation, the kids who will miss out on their education today, but also those armed forces veterans who risk their lives for our freedoms, who won't be able to celebrate Armed Forces Day on Saturday.
Do you want to apologise for all that, Mick?
Well, I think Jonathan should apologise for talking nonsense. None of that is true.
And you're a liar. What the rest of the country suffers from is the lack of power, the lack of the ability to organise, and the lack of the wherewithal to take on these employers that are continually driving down wages and making the working class in this country poorer year on year on year, while the rich get richer. Now, I welcome anyone that wants to join us on our picket lines and show us messages of support.
All right. Well,
if Keir Starmer can't do that, that's a problem for him, not for us. I don't want people to be inconvenienced, and I want a settlement to this dispute. I can't do that with a backbench MP who's just learned it off a script. And one of the reasons we're not affiliated is because Labour politicians since Blair have not identified with working class people. And failing to do that is one of the problems they've got in working class communities. And they've left the door open to populists and others to come into the situation. The Labour Party is about supporting working people, or it should be, not triangulating from opinion makers such as the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the Times. So they've got to sort out their identity, and they've got to come up with a set of policies.
So there you go. That's him talking about the Labour Party. And he also, in another clip, he talks about the fact that the RMT helped found the Labour Party back in the 1930s or whatever it was. So yeah, some good pieces there. Any comments on them, Chris?
Yeah, so obviously I've enjoyed watching him obviously take down Tory MPs to account, because they're the ones who have held power for the past 12 years. But also he equally goes after the Labour Party. And I think that's put a lot of normal sort of wishy-washy Labour socialists into a difficult position, because it's forced them to sort of come to terms with the fact that their parent party that calls itself the political wing of the British Labour movement has not been supporting organised labour in this country. There was an article this was from last July, so when the strikes really started to take full swing. Labour frontbenchers likely to be disciplined for joining rail picket, because Keir Starmer at the time, he couldn't bring himself to say that he supports the strikes. And this is the situation we're in now. This is why he's going to win, because he's made himself this Tony Blair type of character. Remember, Tony Blair won the support of the Rupert Murdoch newspapers by showing that he was a safe pair of hands, that he wasn't really Labour and that he wasn't going to do anything. And that's what Keir Starmer's replicating, which is why he's going to win. That's why the establishment are letting him win. Because he's saying, it's winking at the camera, I'm not really a socialist. It is what Engels would call the Labour aristocracy, the controlled Labour leadership. They're placed there to stop us doing anything. And Mick Lynch is very good at sort of exposing that and showing that these people who are meant to be our political leaders aren't. And I'd hazard a guess that if Mick Lynch was to join the Labour Party, I don't actually know if he is already. But if he was to run as leader of the Labour Party, I guess he'd win very quickly and very easily. I think he's probably more popular than either leader at the moment.
I think that there's something to be said there, that definitely he should be having perhaps more ambitions than just sticking with the RMT, as though I'm sure that he's very good at representing the RMT, so it'd be quite a jump for him, at least in some respects, in the sense of trying to get into the Labour machinery, which we've already talked about in the past, is a pretty messy machine and pretty brutal and vicious in trying to protect a certain line of thinking. But I do think that there's something to be said there. I think that the fact that you have so much popularity with the unions, as we already discussed, you have a cost of living crisis. So I think someone like him standing for those kinds of things, for common people sort of pay and common sort of issues, I could see that kind of talk is going to be very popular. It is very popular. But I don't know. I don't know if the if the Labour Party. I mean, I'm curious to see how this goes. I just don't think that. I just can't see them allowing it. If Keir Starmer is going to clean out Corbyn and the sort of,
no, they would never allow it. This is the party that kicked out Ken Loach.
Yes.
You can't be left wing in the Labour Party anymore. It is literally under Keir Starmer. There was a really good book that was released a couple of years ago called The Labour, and it was called A Party with Socialists in It. And the whole premise of the book was how the Labour Party has spent the past 70 years basically absorbing every left-wing movement for the exact notion of holding the edge. And Keir Starmer has almost changed that by kicking them all out again. But unfortunately, because this country does not have a mass alternative to the Labour Party, we've now got a disenfranchised socialist movement who aren't welcome in the Labour Party anymore, because it's now the party of the centrists.
So I don't know where it's all going to go. I mean, maybe this will be the impetus for people joining some other party, the socialists and the trade union joining some other party. But I think that would be quite a big political moment. I mean, that would be a political bombshell if the TUC and other unions dropped the Labour Party as their sort of affiliation, even though the RMT isn't affiliated, as you already mentioned. So if you had more further parties dropping that affiliation, moving to something else, that would be a big shift in British politics, huge shift in British politics. Yeah.
I think that would be the straw that sort of breaks camel's back when the unions finally do break the link with the Labour Party, which is something that should always be on every placard at every picket, as far as I'm concerned. That should be the main goal of sort of propagating within the trade union movement, that the Labour Party isn't there to represent your interests. It is there to hold them hostage. And until they have broke the link with the Labour Party, this is just going to be a carousel that goes round and round.
Yeah. I think that's also another thing to be said about this is that the Labour Party leadership right now, particularly the parliamentary party and stuff, they do not like this. This is politics being driven from the bottom, as they would say, the grassroots. This is, society from the bottom choosing an issue and driving it from there, pay particularly and work conditions. They don't want, this is not the conversation that they want to have. I mean, we talked already about how the Conservatives don't have an actual good plan for Britain and have not been doing a good job. The only thing that they can try and work out is this war. Apparently, this is their grand plan. But I think equally, maybe even worse, actually, the Labour Party has less of an idea, less of a vision, and also apparently has less connection with the majority. Okay, I would say have less connection than the Tories, but they certainly don't have the connection that should be there. Labour is not, hand in hand with the unions on this one.
No, not at all. And like I said, that is what you just said, with the fact that this is being led by an organised labour movement. The workers are essentially just being like a cannonball on the deck for the Labour Party here. They're trying to mismanage. They're trying to manage it, mismanaging it at every turn. The fact that it took Keir Starmer so long to say anything even remotely that could be judged as supportive of the strikes, which I think in the end was just I understand why they are striking. That is not an endorsement, and that is not support.
But as we know, Keir Starmer is busy sitting there with his calculator trying to see exactly how to say what he can to absorb the support of the Labour movement without necessarily trying to actually support it. So obviously there's a room full of very clever Labour brains sitting there and figuring out how to actually support these strikes without actually supporting them. To take the honey from the nest without actually having to shake the bees or join the bees.
I'm sure another Tony Blair funded think tank will tell him what to say pretty soon.
Exactly. That's it.
What was the last one? The Tony Blair Institute for Regime Change. I'm sure this one will be
that was it. I believe it was the Tony Blair Middle Eastern Institute for Peace. I think that's
don't know why it stuck in my head as regime change.
So the last clip we've got is of Mick Lynch and
I believe is your Facebook
Piers Morgan.
page. I want you to confirm or deny if this is your Facebook page. It's a picture of
Can you see the
hood from Thunderbirds.
Can you see the likeness?
Well, I'm just wondering where the comparison goes, because he was obviously an evil, criminal, terrorist mastermind, described as the world's most dangerous man who wreaked utter carnage and havoc on the public.
Is that the level you're pitching this at, Piers? That is a joke amongst me and my friends, and you can see the likeness, if you like.
So you're not denying that you are comparing yourself to the hood?
I'm not comparing myself to anyone. I'm me.
You've literally made your profile picture the hood. And I'm simply saying, I was a massive...
What? If it was a bunch of flowers,
Thunderbirds fan, and the hood was the most dangerous, evil person in the world.
He's the most evil puppet made out of vinyl in the world. Is that the level your journalism's at these days?
I simply asked you if that was you and your Facebook page.
Well, do you think I look like the most evil person in the world, Piers?
Well, now you're asking me to answer a difficult question, Mick. I don't know you that well. All I'm saying is
I'm
you
the
have
most evil
personally...
person in the world. I think I'm a working-class bloke who's leading a trade union in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions.
I understand. If you don't want to be compared to the hood, probably better not to have the hood as your profile picture.
I think it's quite funny.
So do I. But I also like... As I was a Thunderbirds fan...
Is that the level we're at, though? Don't you want to talk about the issues rather than a little vinyl puppet from the 1960s?
I'm simply trying to get inside the mindset of the man about to wreak havoc on the country. It makes me laugh honestly, that you have the hood as your profile pic, because that's a man who wreaked havoc on the world.
Well, it makes me laugh that your level of journalism has descended so far that you can't think of any other question rather than a thing about the Thunderbirds.
I didn't put that picture on your profile page.
Yeah, but you've chosen to spend 2 or 3 minutes of this interview talking about an irrelevant.
Because you seem so irritated by the comparison. Well, because you seem so irritated by the comparison to the hood.
I'm not irritated at all. I'm completely.
You seem very irritated.
Well, I'm not.
You're not? This is your non-irritated phase, is it?
What point are you trying to prove, Piers? I mean,
I'm not trying to prove anything.
Succeeding.
You put it on your Facebook page. I'm simply asking. It's an odd choice for a union boss who's about to go on a series of strikes to have
Piers,
that as your choice.
To say about...
It reminds me of. Have you seen Bruce Almighty when he's interviewing the old lady? Why did you throw the heart into the Titanic? Did it make you sad leaving Leonardo DiCaprio to freeze in the water when he could have gone on the door with you?
Yeah. Yes. I can't remember that one, but yeah, it is ridiculous. Like,
yeah, it just shows that.
Do you think you are similar to this? Do you see yourself as a mastermind terrorist leader? No,
just that. Well, if you would don't want to be compared against someone who's wreaking havoc against the country, so because that's Piers Morgan's starting point, and that's what his job is. He's there to play that narrative, and it doesn't. Yeah. You can't give Mick Lynch credit for even doing this, because obviously the audience is still doing it, because as the polls are showing, support for the strikes, and so the narrative isn't working. But a lesser man would definitely just think, well, what's the entertaining the likes of Piers Morgan and Richard Madeley?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think there have been some other notable appearances by, I think, Dempsey and other people in the Labour movement. But I do think that Mick Lynch has done a great job at showing them, actually making them look ridiculous. And the other thing is he doesn't actually ever get too angry. He never gets angry. He never breaks his cool, which I think they've wanted him to do, and wanted him to come across as some sort of shouting madman from the, some communist Marxist man who's just going to try and cause revolution, which I don't think he is.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so that is it for this week. We haven't decided on our topic for next week, so you'll have to see and be surprised by that. But thank you very much if you haven't been watching. So you can like, share, hit the notifications bell, and subscribe. Please subscribe to the Ministry of Propaganda, and we will see you next week.
Thank you very much. See you next week.